Welcome back to Crosswalk.com's Inside the Editor's Room podcast, where we give you a look at how our editors tackle the trends and issues of the day from a Christian perspective. I'm Stephen McGarvey, the editor-in-chief here for Crosswalk.com, and I'm joined by my usual colleagues, Rachel Dawson, Kelly Gibbons, and Sean McAvoy. This week on episode 7.5 of our show is one of my favorite topics, the topic of television. Now, just to set this up, when I was young, not so long ago, but longer ago than when some of the rest of you were young, when my parents came to faith in the mid-'80s, and when they did, our television was shut down and given away. And
just given away.
I'm sorry. So sad.
We are shutting your television down.
Such a sad story.
Little Steve out on the front walk. No, come back, television.
TV.
Obviously, I'm still telling the story because it hurt me very much when I was little Steve had to give his TV away. But no, in the 80s, that was a huge deal for Christians. It was like severing your ties to secular culture and not letting secular culture influence you, and especially influence your kids in any particular nasty way. So it was rare in the circles that when we hung out with Christians back then, for people to have or watch or talk about television. And now, a few years later, or a few more for me than others, that seems rare to me. In fact, I hardly ever meet a Christian who has such a strong stand against the culture in general and television in particular as sort of like the device that Satan uses to turn your kids against. We joke, but that's it. Almost looking back at that as a kid, it feels, looking back at my childhood, it feels like that's what it was like.
That was the message.
Satan's going to get you through your television. Maybe people were watching too much Poltergeist or what have you. But I'm interested to talk about that a little bit and hear from you guys. Like, did you have similar restrictions on television as kids? And why do you think it is that our Christian culture has changed quite a bit, where it's very rare to meet a Christian who feels such strong negativity toward having a television? Sean, you're a little older than me and
thanks,
perhaps
Steve.
went through something similar. Tell us your thoughts.
We didn't go through it with television. In fact, in our house, we were one of the first families on our block to get the cable television and had a little slide box. You still had to get up and move it. You didn't have a remote, but it was like a zipper slide. But there were like 50 channels instead of 5. I know, it was amazing. Yeah. So, no, but in our house, it was music. So there were little pockets of this everywhere. I didn't see it with the TV, but it was my mom's church decided, based on what Bible verse, I don't know, that anything with a 4/4 beat, even Christian rock music, was bad. And that's how the devil was going to get into your life, through the voodoo beat. Mm-hmm. So it existed in all sorts of different things. Some people didn't go to movies at all. And I still see that today in some places. So it does still exist.
Pretty much all of those were true in my childhood, too. It was just the television.
The television was the one that hurt the most.
Most scarring.
This is how you're hurting me.
So was that in response to the 70s and that culture? I just haven't, this is so foreign to me. This wasn't my experience at all with television. So what do you think caused your parents to freak out? And you said it was like kind of Christians everywhere at that time were doing that, right?
It seemed like it to me. And it may have been.
There were pockets, yeah. And we knew people. And I mean, one of the first things when I got on Facebook a few years ago, my old camp director, whose house we used to go to watch things like Home Improvement on our night off, told us all that the greatest thing he ever did, and the reason his kids were the most amazing kids in the world now, was because a few years ago he and his wife threw the televisions out of their house. And that was the best thing one could ever do. I've just never seen a need for it. Turn it on when you want it on, watch what you want to watch, be responsible with it. And that was our rule growing up too, is if you got caught watching the wrong thing, you were in trouble. But otherwise you knew the basic expectations of what you could and couldn't see. So it was never, we're going to get rid of this kind of thing. We were even the first people in our block to get a VCR, the big top loading giant thing, had to carry it like this, very heavy, but yeah. So
yeah, I feel like that's how my family was too. It was just if you were caught watching something, you were going to get in trouble for it, but no one was sitting. I mean, we didn't have any monitors or any guards, I guess, to keep us from like flipping to certain channels, because those were available like later on as I grew up. But I remember watching TV a lot. I mean, I know I played outside a lot too and played in my room a lot, but TV was definitely like a part of my life all through grade school and into high school. And it never really seemed to be like a big sticking point with my parents, who were both very strong believers. But I mean, I guess they would pay attention a little bit to what I was watching, but we never really had deep conversations about television and the evils and pitfalls and things about it. So I don't know. It was just kind of there.
Just to illustrate the difference, we in the music and the TV, the only thing I ever got in trouble for watching was a rock concert. And because my mom was on the other side of the house, I watched a stupid Police concert with the volume all the way down. Who watches a rock concert without sound? Wow. And then I got in trouble for it anyway when she came in and found me.
I was ready to turn it up.
Yeah.
Growing up for us, we never had cable, so we never really had much of a desire to watch TV. And I just don't remember watching anything except for like an occasional PBS show. And even so, I remember if we did have the TV on, it was all of us in the room together watching. So it was never something that like I did on my own. And I remember my mom always jokes that at some point we started watching Seventh Heaven on TV, and I could never sleep afterward because I would get so like emotionally caught up in the story that I like couldn't handle it. And she's like, then we just knew like TV wasn't for you. Like you just got too attached to everything. So
that's how my son was with Go Diego Go. We couldn't let him watch that when he was little because he just gets so wound up.
But yeah, we didn't have cable until right before I left high school for college, and I never really cared about it, never really watched anything, and I never really feel like I missed out either. I think people joke a lot about like, oh, the old, good old days of Nickelodeon or the cartoons we grew up on, and there's conversations like that come back, but I rarely feel like, oh man, my life would have been so much better had I seen like whatever show. And I don't have cable now. I never felt like I really needed it. I never really miss it. I mean, I watch Netflix occasionally, but even so, I think most of the time when I'm watching something, it's with other people in the room having a shared experience and not just me off on my own watching TV. And I've kind of viewed it as like my roommate and I were, going through the OC because I never had seen that, and she had watched it growing up, and it was one of those kind of like nostalgic things that we now do together.
And that's the thing that's changed today is, we used to watch Lost, and everyone in the office watched Lost. And if you didn't, you missed out on all the water cooler discussions. The next day we would even have lunches. But the binge watching has changed everything, and just the ability to not have to keep up with a show. You can watch. It's probably more fun to watch it all at once later. Now, Steve, didn't you say that in the TV was it would get pulled out in your day? Slightly after my day, but that the TV would come out for just the Olympics, and that was the show.
That was sort of the compromise position, which is what we adapted later. Was the no cable position. So you weren't allowed to watch live television, and a lot of families still had a television. They didn't throw it away; they just put it away, except for when like the Super Bowl came on or the Olympics or some event, or like, the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up.
So a shared event, kind of like.
Yeah, exactly. It was a big deal to go, like my friend who had television, we all were allowed to go over to his house and watch the Super Bowl, and as that incidentally, the, VCRs became more popular right around that time. So we didn't have cable or any, we were living in a place that didn't get any reception. So we did have the television and the VCR when I was older, but my parents were super selective. There was never any like go watch TV and trust that, even as a teenager, trust that we'll just, know what to watch and what not to watch. They're very strict about like what was allowed to be on the television. And now, I wonder if, now that we have so many more options on cable, like for history and learning and science and, so many internet options, and YouTube has changed the way we consume all of this stuff. Like sometimes I feel like my kids would rather watch videos on YouTube than any sort of network television or anything like that. I wonder if that's sort of softened everybody, who was much stricter on it, in the 80s, when it's basically 5 channels unless you pay for cable. Like you're going to pay to have Satan deliver this awful stuff to you in the middle of your, that's like even worse. So it's, I wonder if maybe that's the reason. It's like, well, we've seen your so many young adults in the 80s were coming out of the 70s and coming out of like the time of hippies and free love, and seeing that things were changing and different from when they were were children, and what they watched on television was often more racy and anti-Christian than what they remembered as they were kids. And now there's just so many options that people just don't seem to be that concerned about it.
But I think the pendulum also swung at one point, just generally overall, in that we were really in a time of fundamentalism for fundamentalism's sake, and that later people were like, well, a lot of what we're doing here isn't necessarily biblical or required, or and we can have some more maturity about it. Just in a similar issue, I think is alcohol, and how, from what I remember way back then, there was much more teetotaling, and this was the only way to be a Christian.
Yeah.
Whereas over the years, that pendulum has swung and said, no, this isn't biblically forbidden, but drunkenness is, and as long as I can be moderate about this, there's no damage to my Christian walk or witness. So it's the same thing with a lot of the culture that we intake, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of rules do you have for your kids now? And I know it's not really cable TV now, it's like internet, YouTube, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and
kind of stuff?
the most rules we have to make is for just, we call it screen rules, basically, screen time stuff, a certain amount of time each day. It's more of a challenge during the summer with both Valerie and me working. Right. So, we try to keep it the time to a minimum, both on their devices and then we have some parental controls on them too, so that helps. And that's something we didn't have back then. Yeah. That also, I think, helps parents to be a little bit more free with what they allow. And when they were younger, it'd be a couple hours each day, and it'd usually be more educational programming. I grew up on the Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street, and those aren't the shows my kids watch. They watch Diego and Dora and Blue's Clues and all that when they were growing up, and that was fine. Yeah. So we were not above plopping the kids in front of the TV, and I know you mentioned something a few weeks ago. Sometimes you just need to do that.
Yeah, totally.
So we don't have hard and fast rules. We just try to enforce some general, what we feel are healthy screen time rules, and then the bad stuff is hopefully protected behind the firewalls.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like my parents, didn't really monitor anything, and I probably got to watch more than I should have, or, looking back, like, they could have monitored me a little more, and yet I feel like I turned out okay. I mean,
and
I
yet
think
you
that
seem fine.
I seem fine, yeah.
I think it just depends on the age and
and
the child and what like adults, like everyone has a list of things that they struggle with and things that just don't bother them all that much. For my kids, there is the challenge is being purposeful about it, just like not turning it on and just watching forever until someone tells you to turn it off. Yeah. And so that's what we try to guard against. Like we do. We've loosened up on my son a little bit because he's older now. He's almost 13, but, our rules have always been, anything that you want to watch, you need to get the show approved by us first. And then after they know the list of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And they're always finding out about new things and coming back to us and saying, well, can we try this? Can we try that? And, sometimes it's yes and sometimes it's no. And with summer, it's been a little difficult because it's just so, you have to fill that. I feel like we have to be purposeful about, like, because
that's when they will turn it on just because they have nothing else they want.
Yeah. You don't have homework in school pressing you to be, on time for things and doing other things and getting other things done. So we sort of set up a system by which they buy their TV time by doing chores or playing outside or, doing educational stuff, to keep sharp over the summer. And they earn a certain amount of television time every week by doing things that are not related to television. So we found that that's working.
This has all reminded me. We did have, when they were younger, we did have 2 shows that were banned, for completely different reasons that my wife decided were banned. One of them was Caillou.
I was going to say, I knew that was coming.
Because the first time my son ever whined about something like this, she said, Caillou's gone.
You're dead to me, Caillou.
That's right. And I still remember my daughter coming home at 4 from preschool one day and telling me about her bad friend Fisher. And in Fisher's house, they watch SpongeBob SquarePants. Because our mommy had said SpongeBob SquarePants is a bad show. So even though every other kid got to watch it, and every time I've ever seen it, I'm like, Val, why this? Why is this the show? But, so SpongeBob was he never got to meet my kids.
So funny. My parents didn't want me to watch Rugrats, of all things, which it was like, I think because they were kind of more like sneaky and devious when the parents weren't looking and my mom didn't. But it was like, I watched so much stuff. It's like Rugrats was so mild. But I remember that was like the one thing that if I was watching it on Nick, she'd be like, turn the channel. I think sometimes parents just like get annoyed by shows.
Yeah,
too,
they do.
And they're like, you can't watch that
Yeah,
anymore.
I was initially very annoyed by SpongeBob, and then I grew to accept it in our lives, and my kids don't pay much attention to it anymore. But yeah, you do have that. There are things that come on after things that they are allowed to watch that sometimes they try to sneak in.
Yeah.
And there's been a couple of shows lately that I've like had to say, guys, this is really annoying. Like, let's not watch this. Like, this is not on Daddy's list of things we're allowed to watch. So, it's just good to pay attention. You don't have to be draconian about it, but just watching and paying attention and making sure that you're involved with what they're doing and the decisions that they're making.
It sounds like it all boils down to choices and communication, like everything else.
I was always the weird kid that couldn't watch anything. Every time there was a movie at school or any sort of thing that you had a permission slip for, my parents always said no, and I always had to get sent to the other classroom to, do the alternate activity. But I don't think I ever minded. I mean, people said stuff, but it was kind of like, whatever. Like, I don't think I missed anything by not getting to watch Apollo 13 in 4th grade or whatever. But even now, I don't care about being the person that I'm always the person like, I never seen that. I never watched that. Simpsons, never seen it. This, never seen it. Like, no idea. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't really bother me. I don't know. I think it's just maybe a personality thing too, of just knowing like.
It is. There were a lot of kids that would bother, but you strike me as you're the one that would not.
Not concerned.
And as an adult, I feel like, especially with what we do here, it's important to know about what's going on in the world.
Sure.
And I think that's, as Christians, that is not a bad or scary thing. So the way that I'm raising my kids is to be discerning, I think, about those things. And you can't teach them how to be discerning with that if you just say no to this and no to that and no to this. And I'm probably a little bit more permissible than I should be sometimes, but I am hoping that it turns, as a lot of dads do, hoping that some of these things turn into opportunities to share life lessons and teach them about, well, that was this way. Well, you take that and compare it to what Scripture teaches, and what do we know about that behavior?
That's me too, Steve. I've decided that's the side I'm going to err upon. And so I wonder if that's going to turn my kids into the fundy parents again one day. My dad was too permissive, and you will watch nothing now.
When the pendulum swings back the other way, yeah.
And that brings us to the end of our show. Thank you to Kelly, Sean, and Steve for sharing your thoughts today. And thanks to Steven Sanders and Kyle Fletcher, our audio engineers. You can find us over on Facebook at facebook.com/crosswalkpodcast. We would love to hear your thoughts about how TV was in your house growing up and what you are loving about TV today. To find out more about the topics we talked about today or to listen to any of our past episodes, be sure to visit our site, InsideTheEditorsRoom.com, and be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get all of our future episodes right to your phone. Thanks for listening.